Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome all of you to our webinar titled Palestine, Israel, and Global Accountability. I have the honor of being your host today. My name is Ida Reini, and I represent Sumud, the Finnish Palestine network. It's one of the organizers of this event. Sumud was established in summer of 2023, and we are an intersectional organization based here in Finland. We work toward ending Israeli apartheid, occupation, colonialism, and genocide while advocating for the realization of Palestinian human and political rights. The webinar is a collaborative effort, so I would like to also acknowledge our co-organizing partner, the Finnish Women, Peace and Security Network. The network is composed of over 27 Finnish organizations and is coordinated by UN Women Finland. At the end of last year, the network formed a thematic action group focused on advocacy work related to Palestine, particularly from the women, peace and security perspective. Next, I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists who are all about to arrive. Our first panelist will be Francesca Albanese, who is an international lawyer who has been serving as the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory since May 2022. Francesca is a former UN official and currently an affiliate scholar at the Institute for the Study of International Migration at Georgetown University. She's also a senior advisor on migration and forced displacement for the think tank Arab Renaissance for Democracy and Development. Next, we will hear from Tamam Abusalama, a communication expert born and raised in the Jabalia refugee camp in the Gaza Strip, now based in Brussels, Belgium. Tamam is a contributing writer for several media outlets, including Mondoweiss and Electronic Intifada, where she focuses on personal testimonies and issues related to Palestinian rights and social justice. Finally, we are joined by Budour Hassan, Amnesty International's researcher on Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory, with a current focus on Gaza. We will start with presentations from each of our panelists, followed by questions from the organizers. Then we will open the floor for audience questions, which you can submit through the Q&A box. Remember to follow our safer space rules when participating. The webinar will be recorded and will be uploaded to Sumud's YouTube channel afterwards. And just seeing, we have today some exciting news. Welcome, now Francesca is coming. Just giving her a second to connect. Welcome, Francesca. I was just about to move to you. So we are done with the introduction of the panel and we can begin with our first speaker. So please welcome Francesca Albanese, who will share their insights on global accountability and the role of the third-party states under international law. Francesca, you have around 30 minutes. The floor is yours. You're muted.
Thank you very much. Sorry for being slightly late. And if you can just remind me, because it was not clear, how much I have for my introductory remarks. Ida, you are muted.
Sorry, you have 30 minutes, so until 3.
Wow, it's a long time. It's a long time, but I've also, will we have enough time for question and answers? I hope so.
Yeah, in the end we have time.
Yeah, it's a big day. I mean, I've been taken off guard, I must say, from the news that, of course, you've all heard. For those of you who have not, the ICC pretrial chamber has issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. And that's incredible because there are so many things, and this is quite a moment because again, it's not going to bring back the life of those who have perished. I do see as the beginning of something that starts very, very late, because had the International Court of Justice started this and issued arrest warrants including against for Benjamin Netanyahu, years or at least a decade ago, probably we would be in a different place today, I tend to think. Because war crimes and crimes against humanity is what the Palestinians have endured all along. The very enterprise that Israel has set in motion. Let's not even talk about 1948 and happen to talk about 1948 when Israel was created inside Palestine on the land that was 90% Palestinians, owned individually and collectively by Palestinians, kicking out 750,000 Palestinians of their homes and never allowing them to come back, denationalizing them in violations of international law as it stood back then. And I've often said through my scholarship, this is before becoming a special rapporteur, the right of return for the Palestinians is not to be found in Resolution 194 of 1948. It's in the law as it stood back then in pre-1948. It's the right not to be denationalized. It's the right to be compensated, first of all, to have restitution. And when restitution of the material things taken is not possible, to be compensated. But also, and most importantly, during a situation of armed conflict under the Hague Regulation, people shouldn't be expelled out of their land. Only war prisoners can be taken out. The others, and again, peace cannot be signed before prisoners of war are returned. So, the system was already geared to protect the Palestinians. There was already a principle of self-determination that was recognized to the people in the Levant, and it applied to everyone, the Syria, Lebanese, Egyptian, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan people, except for the Arabs of Palestine. So the Arab, Christian, and Muslims of Palestine, because a small percentage was also Jewish. But however, let these never addressed global injustice aside. As of 1967, Israel has used the pretense of military occupation to advance the taking of the land and the taking of Palestinian resources for its own expansion. As of 1967, a plan has been devised. It's called the Allon Plan, which Israelis say, yeah, but it was never really approved. Doesn't matter. So much has been advanced in terms of policies on the ground in Israel without policies being officially signed off. And again, look at the dynamics. Colonies, which are war crimes under Article 49 in and of themselves, have sprouted across the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip until 2005. Since 1967, up to the point that today we have 800,000 Israelis living in occupied land. And this doesn't include the Israelis who live peacefully with the Palestinians. There are a number, not many, but anti-apartheid Israelis who left Israel and who live with the Palestinians, renting property from the Palestinians. And so it's an integral relationship, and it's not an abusive one. It's not a suprematist one. So there have been colonies. The taking of the land has meant forced displacement for the Palestinians, another crime, another international crime. There has been mass incarceration. This is where I devoted my second report as a special rapporteur to, because Palestinians are doomed being guilty until they're proven innocent. And most of the time, they're not even proven innocent because they need to settle within the martial law system that governs their life. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but for 57 years, Palestinians have lived under thousands of military orders and emergency laws that date back to the colonial time, to the British Mandate time, written by soldiers, enforced by soldiers, punitive in nature, and reviewed in military courts, where the Israeli military personnel is military personnel, soldiers. They are not judges, and they're not meant to enforce civil law, martial law. which is not protective for individuals. This is why it's against human rights law to use criminal courts to try civilians. And these tribunals, these trials, are for children as young as 12. It's incredible. So the system has also meant punitive house demolitions, various forms of collective punishment and torment. And I often say the violence we have seen escalating as of October last year is not new, because violence has always been steady for the Palestinians. Low pace, fast pace, now it's fastest pace, but it's always been determined by this drive to expel the Palestinians, to erase Palestinianness, to Judaize the land. And this is the essence, this is the hallmark of settler colonialism, which is not an instance of the past, not just because of Palestine, but I beg you, as young people, please, you need to appropriate yourselves of our history, especially Western people should know that for 500 years, we Europeans, some more than others, have been on colonial enterprise. For 500 years, we have subjugated indigenous people, genocided indigenous people, reduced them to reserves, broken not just their bloodlines, which resulted in genocide in Canada, in Australia, cut their livelihood, put them in reserves, as in the United States. But again, we shouldn't think of settler colonialism as an instance of the past. Because if you talk to indigenous people, indigenous nations, from Australia to New Zealand, to Canada, from Canada to the United States, these people are still struggling for nation-to-nation recognition and self-determination. They're still kicked out of their land. Their land is still taken. And this is land that has never been ceded. This is land that has been stolen by white European colonizers. Religion has been used as a way to subjugate them, as an excuse. But again, we are in 2024 now. We have a human rights system, and we must make it real. So my accountability reflection starts with the fact that Palestine today has reignited, has reactivated or awakened a sort of global consciousness about old problems that are still lingering, like settler colonialism and Western supremacism. I don't think that there wouldn't be other forms of supremacism other than, but now it's us leading this, and it must stop. Also, look at Palestine. So this is why, sorry, going back to the point I was making, accountability is a global struggle, is a global fight. So yes, this year we have seen Palestine being that opportunity. I mean, we saw a local crisis become a regional crisis, a global crisis. We saw young people making it at their own cost, because younger people have this ability that we in the older generation do not have. But there is a grade of maturity in reading the interconnectedness of injustices and struggles, the environmental justice one, together with the one against capitalism, with the one for recognition of gender identity, still the struggle for full protection of women's rights. So there is this interconnectedness of struggles because there is an interconnectedness of injustices. So accountability today is for Palestine, but it is to be broader than for Palestine. Let it make the opportunity to reflect on the evils of the system we have inherited, which is ours, and still has some opportunities. Human rights are a reality, but they are not a struggle that is won and a battle that is won and then it stays forever. the fight for human rights is a continuous fire to keep alive, not to lose terrain, and to keep expanding, especially looking at the most vulnerable. So accountability for me means the delivery of justice, and justice means delivering the promise of human rights. What does it mean? At an international level, and for Palestine today, it means a trajectory that it can be articulated in 3 steps. End of the genocide. Now, end of the genocide is an imperative. We see that the system is resisting. We see that the West, more than the rest, is totally, especially the US, is totally uncomfortable with this idea, because it's fighting a much broader war than against the Palestinians. It's geopolitical control, it's imperialism. And if any of what I say sounds esoteric, as it would have been for me a few years ago, please tell me, and I will get through it. But so there is also, so the accountability is end of the genocide. And in order to fight genocide and to bring a genocide to an end, we need to see genocide. We need to understand this genocide, because the intent to destroy the Palestinians through mass killing, infliction of severe bodily and mental harm, or creation of conditions of life leading to the destruction of a group, or in total or in part, again, and this is the critical element of genocide, with the determination, not the reason why, but the determination to destroy, is present in Israeli words, the statements that have been supported by the seizing of the opportunity to carry out a genocide, the capacity to carry out a genocide, and the reality. Gaza is destroyed today. The Palestinian soul is devastated today. And yes, they might reconstitute themselves, but Gaza is gone in many respects. It will have to build into something else. It will never be what it was. It's been destroyed. And what was the target was not Hamas, was not liberating the hostages. These are not other intents. The intent is the determination to destroy. The motives do not count in international criminal law as in genocide. There can be 1 million motives, but the motives, if the motives have been enough to fuel and produce the determination to destroy, that's genocide. And genocide doesn't even to take place for it to be stopped, prevented. It's the mere incitement to genocide that should have been stopped. This is why I often say, when we special rapporteurs alerted the international community that there was a risk of genocide in mid-October, and I also alerted on the risk of mass ethnic cleansing, which now is a reality. Everyone's speaking about that. Yes, I said it on October 18, because as a scholar of forced displacement of the Palestinians, I know what Israel does under the fog of war. Get rid of the Palestinians. So, back to square one. It's we said it, 30 of us, 30 special rapporteurs, we said there is a risk of genocide. And then 1 week later, there is a serious risk of genocide. And as of beginning of November, we said that there might be a genocide unfolding. And then there was the ICJ proceeding started in 15 days without even looking at the content of the merit. The ICJ issued provisional measures and did it in January, and then in March, and then in May. And they were violated by Israel and other states. Whomever didn't conform to the ICJ provisional measures, including the recommendation given in another genocide case, Nicaragua versus Germany, where the Court of Justice said that member states are reminded of their obligation not to transfer weapons or arms to a country where atrocities might be committed and genocide might be committed. That was clear. Import, exports, transfer of weapons or component weapons, any dual-use element, including fuel, should have not been transferred. And instead, the United States and most European states have continued to tolerate this, which leads me to the next point. This is why I insist. Now, the trajectory is end of the genocide now, end of the occupation and illegal occupation, and the International Court of Justice this year has said the occupation is unlawful, and not because it violates the rule of law, the rules of war. It violates the UN Charter. It's an aggression. It's an act of annexation, which has translated into appropriation of land, resources, building of settlements, and the racial segregation and apartheid. Enough. And the General Assembly has given until September next year to Israel to withdraw the occupation. What are member states doing to make sure that this is accomplished? Member states cannot aid and assist in any possible way a state which is committing that crime, which is maintaining an unlawful occupation, which is tantamount, and the ICJ has said it, any possible ways than words, that it amounts to annexation. So, end of genocide now, end the occupation by September next year, end of the apartheid. And this is what applying international law means. However, if it doesn't happen, does it mean that international law and accountability have failed? Hell no. And let me explain why, and this is the last point I wanted to make. You see that the justice, the machinery of international justice is finally on motion. I opened this presentation saying, yes, it's a bit late, but doesn't matter, it's there. It's important to have arrest warrants that will be for two people who have been identified for war crimes and crimes against humanity. Not all the charges that were suggested have been reflected, but doesn't mean investigation will stop at that. So, this is the beginning of a long-term process, and there will be a battle launched by Israel and the United States like no tomorrow. Let's brace for the repercussions, and will be heavy. And this is why I want to see a test for Europe. Does Europe stand with the US? Or does Europe stand with international law, with the multilateral order, with the protection of human rights, human life, and humanity? And hence the last point. Justice for Palestine starts at home. Yesterday, there was a case, it became public that a case pending before a UK court has forced the UK government to admit that they didn't do enough to prevent violations of international law by Israel. And now this process is ongoing because it will end up with a conclusion by the UK court on whether policymakers can be held accountable. But you know what's the responsibility on all of us? Because there is no European country which is fully compliant with international law when it comes to the legality of the occupation. Let me tell you why. First of all, we need to examine, and this is something for young researchers, for the civil society, we need to examine what our rulers, what our governments have done not to aid and assist the illegal occupation. Have they cut at least financial and economic ties with Israel in a way that didn't impact the occupation? What is the political role they have played? Have they sheltered Israel from responsibility? Have they complied with the provisional measures? Yes or no? Have they transferred weapons to Israel, even indirectly, even dual-use items during the time after the provisional measures of the ICJ, in a way that could sort of hamper Palestinians' life and rights? This is the first. So hold accountable policymakers. Second, hold accountable your own fellow nationals who might have been directly involved in the legality of the occupation as settlers, and they might have committed crimes. Although the settlements as a crime, they are attributable to the state, still they are a great breach of international law, so they might lead to individual liability. Therefore, organizations who have been selling Palestinian property abroad, settlers who might have committed crimes, businesses who have, this is the other element, businesses who have profited from the occupation. And this includes not only the military sector, strategic sector, artificial intelligence, the big companies like Google, Meta, etc. I'm investigating this, so justice will come for them as well, because they have been providing cloud data to the Israeli army to run their artificial intelligence process that program that allowed to identify that broad range of targets of people affiliated to Hamas. They were not even combatants. They were students, doctors, nurses, anyone. I mean, it's been a slaughtering endeavor. And then there are the pension funds, which are, for me, the most depraved form of engagement, because you have people in our own countries putting their savings aside, thinking that this is the way to secure their future, but they do not necessarily know that they are destroying someone's present and future in Palestine. So these are things that have to be scrutinized. And also, if you come from a country, and also your banks or businesses, BDS has issued a full list of companies and products that need to be boycotted. This is what made the collapse of the apartheid possible. The fact that there was a huge movement, global movement against apartheid, hitting apartheid in its economic and financial interest and underpinning. It didn't come from the UN. So we need to learn from the past, the struggle of the past and from the past, from Vietnam, East Timor, our own stories of liberation, our own issues of self-determination, our own history of being part of a colonial empire, and make it right. So the last point is about education. In a world that has completely intoxicated the public debate about what was happening in Palestine in a way that I find extremely dehumanizing, both for the Palestinians and the Israelis. This has the public record has to be fixed. I don't know if you're all Finnish, and I don't know the Finnish media, but most of the media in Europe have replicated the lies spread by the Israeli government and the United States, and the record needs to be fixed. So there is also some work to do to make the media accountable, because if in other genocides, like in Rwanda and former Yugoslavia, and with this I will conclude because I think I reached my 30 minutes, in the international tribunals have found media complicit with spreading genocidal incitement, hatred, etc. This is a unique case where the international media, Western corporate media, have been complicit in cover-up for Israel crimes by deciding to turn into ideological tools to spread a violent political doctrine. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francesca, for your timely presentation. As mentioned, we will hear the two other presentations next, and we'll take all of the questions in the end. So please submit them in the Q&A box. Next, we'll be hearing from Tamam Abusalama, who will talk about the role of civil society in promoting social accountability. Tamam, you have time until 4. Please go ahead.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. And it's absolutely very hard to come and speak after a brilliant woman as Francesca Albanese, the very loved Francesca Albanese. But thanks a lot for having me. And yeah, as a Gazan, as a Palestinian woman and new mother who was actually pregnant and gave birth during the genocide in Gaza, it's absolutely very hard to come and speak to you, and especially that Palestinians have been speaking and calling on escalation of action and pressuring the Israel. Pressuring civil society organizations and individual states and everyone with conscience to act and to end the occupation of Palestine. But I think it's very important that we continue talking, we continue acting, we continue advocating, no matter how long it takes, because we are advocating for the rights of all of us, for liberation. And just to start, I think I will try just to sum up, to outline a little bit of a historical context, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. But I guess, and I hope that we all agree on these facts. Israel is, if you think of Israel, what Israel is a state that was established on a stolen land made of settlers that were brought from all over the globe through the violent disposition, mass displacement, collective slaughter of Palestinians, and theft of their culture, identity, lands, belongings, memories, and even their national aspiration. And if you think of Palestinians, what they are an occupied nation. It's the dispossessed nation that has been enduring and fighting all these forms of colonial violence for over 76 years now, amidst international complicity and facilitation and support of the Israel occupation of Palestine. So Palestinians, as an occupied nation, do have the right to self-determination and occupation and freedom from occupation as entitled by the international law. And in order to do so, in order to reach their objectives and their objective of liberation, they need to use all means necessary to reach these desired rights and to reclaim their freedom and to pursue justice and hold all the complicits and all the criminals accountable. And for that, the Palestinian civil society has been very active and very active and has taken a very important role since the beginning, since very early year of occupation. The Palestinian civil society structured itself in the first Intifada at 1987. And it came out as a form of resistance. That has a very clear and very precise objective, which is the ending of occupation, the illegal, unlawful occupation of Palestine. And that organization, the restructuring of the civil society organization in Palestine, came out as a response, as an immediate response to the demand, the collective demand of masses of Palestinians who were just so frustrated and so tired and super exhausted of constant violence, of constant violations, of enduring humiliation and torture for years, without punishment of an accountability of the perpetrator and which is the apparently, I mean, clearly the colonial state of Israel. And that's why the Palestinians have demanded their mobilization in the national struggle for liberation. And as I said earlier, their objective has always been very clear, which is ending the occupation, the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And for that reason, they used different various broader tools of resistance, from armed resistance to community building to non-armed resistance to anti-apartheid wall protests to strikes to popular committees. They literally used everything, even peaceful peace negotiations as everyone wanted, as the international community wanted. However, these tools proved their failure. Israel continued to displace, to annex further lands, to build settlements, to bring more settlers from other countries at the expense of Palestinians, to oppress, to suppress, to arrest, to kill elderly men, women, children, to literally commit all forms of crimes and all human rights violations against Palestinians. Also, the Western imperialist countries continue to provide support and cover up Israel's crimes under the name of self-defense, while, of course, portraying Palestinians' response to these criminal actions and activities as, of course, terrorism, because Palestinians, they are Arabs and they are non-white, so they are always terrorists and uncivilized who need to be civilized. And also with the global solidarity movement internationally, and with the emergence of the Second Intifada, especially after the Jenin massacre in 2002, the Palestinian civil society acknowledged that there must be another tool of resistance that can be used in order to change this reality and get closer to justice and to freedom, to liberation, to our rights. We cannot go on living like this. So they decided to issue a joint call. So all Palestinian civil society, encompassing the youth movements, the labor unions, refugee networks, healthcare unions, political parties, labor unions, farmers unions, literally everyone in the civil society in Palestine joined this call to action, and they called for boycotts and sanctions and divestment against Israel. And I think here where it comes the role of the international civil society. The international civil society, as the guardian of human rights, of human values everywhere, they need to respond to the calls of the Palestinian people, to the political calls and demands and needs of the Palestinian people and its civil society. And therefore, and that's why the international civil society, as solidarity, as part of the solidarity movement, they need to act as a backbone, an extension of the liberation movement happening and has been happening for years now in Palestine. The international civil society as well need to solidify the understanding of Palestine and connection with other struggles, with other injustices, such as racism, discrimination, environmental injustice, climate injustice, queer rights, gender issues, and the list goes on. Because we need, and the civil society, the international civil society need to understand and need to also help Palestinians to raise awareness and make the international community and their individual member states, their states and people and public people to understand that Palestine is an intersectional cause. It doesn't concern only Palestinians. It concerns the liberation of all of us, regardless our colors, regardless our faith, regardless our religions, and regardless our gender. It's actually a cause of a humanity that should concern everyone with conscience. The international civil society as well need to support the resilience of Palestinian civil society. They need to centralize the voices of Palestinians. We are Palestinians actually are so tired of bringing a white man who went to Palestine for 2 days and come back as an expert to speak on solutions about the Palestine-Israel conflict. It's time that we centralize, especially the civil society, to centralize the Palestinian voice, to centralize the Palestinian expertise, to centralize their emotions, to validate their emotions, their experience, and their expertise, and their vision for the past, the present, and the future. They also need to support the resilience of Palestinian civil society organizations. We have seen how just recently, just last year actually, or 2 years ago, I don't remember when, but the Israel has designated 6 civil society organizations in Palestine as terrorists.
Why? Simply because they have been documented and monitoring Israel's human rights violations and crimes against the humanity and war crimes in Palestine. So they decided just to attack them, to cut their funds, to shut their offices down. So even this, they can support the resilience. International civil society organizations can support even their resilience by assisting them to register in Europe, to even offer them financial support, locations, and all other sources of support and solidarity. International civil society organizations as well need to amplify the political demands of Palestinians. That I'm so tired and so exhausted by people just clapping for recognitions of the recognition of the state of Palestine. I mean, Palestinians, of course, want a sovereign territory, to a sovereign state, but our demands go beyond recognition and statehood. We want a liberation of all the historical Palestine, and we want our return to our right to return to our homelands. This has, I'm not just saying like, you know, it's all affirmed and guaranteed by international law and UN resolutions and all international it's our rights, it's justice. The international civil society as well need to monitor and document their governments and their corporate companies' compliance with human rights, with the human rights and their international obligations, and to pressure them to cut ties with Israel. To end, we have to ensure, we have to ensure that nobody is complicit in oppressing our people. And it's the civil society rule to pressure, to document that their governments and their corporate companies cut ties with everyone, with every entity and actor that is involved in Israel's oppression and occupation of Palestinians. Also, I think this is something that Palestinians are so tired of as well. It is the Western development approach. Palestinians don't want, like, after that, we have seen how after the Oslo Accords in 1993, international donors bumped millions of euros to Palestine, trying to cover up the colonial violence by just some fake institutional development and economic stability in Palestine. But meanwhile, the violence and annexation of lands and arrests and demolition of homes has continued. Palestinians are so tired of these development approaches. They need to understand that it's not development that will save Palestinians and will change the future and the present of Palestinians. It's liberation and justice. And in order to do that, we need to use all tools, including BDS, including boycotting and sanctions and divestment against Israel. We need as well, international civil society need as well to challenge any attempt to depoliticize our cause. Our cause, the Palestinian cause, is not a humanitarian cause. It's not a charitable cause. It's a struggle for liberation, for justice, for rights. And this, it has to be very clear, because truly we're so sick
of just like talking about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. No, it's not a humanitarian crisis. It's a political crisis that has created this a humanitarian crisis in Gaza and Palestine, and has been maintained by the failure by the support and facilitation of Western countries. So if civil society organizations fulfill the rule effectively, this would protect everyone, whether in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, all around the world. It's so effective solidarity mechanisms using peaceful methods as the Western community, the international community want, is the only way desired to reach actually the desired right to determination. They have been calling for everyone has been pressuring us, like, don't, why you're using violence, you are so violent, you have to use peaceful methods and so. But yes, please help us to do so. So join the struggle, join the BDS movement, join the boycott movement. Because if we don't, if civil society, if international civil society organizations fail to join the call for boycott, for BDS movement, and for the use of the peaceful methods of resistance, this would mean that the continuation of Israel's Zionist colonial project in Palestine, at the expense, of course, of the rights of Palestinians. This would also mean the continuation of ethnic cleansing, of mass displacement, of demolition, of siege, of genocide, of mass slaughter, of mass starvation, of all forms of colonial violence. This would eventually lead as well to collective despair, frustration, anger. We've seen it after also the Oslo Accords, which resulted eventually to the emergence of the first Intifada in 2000. And this would, of course, lead to force Palestinians as well to use other forms of resistance. If the peaceful methods of resistance don't succeed, then Palestinians will be forced to use other forms of resistance, including armed resistance. And that's what we've seen in the 7th of October. So actually, what we have been seeing now, the UN General Secretary have called it a crisis of humanity. I agree that it's a crisis of humanity, but it's also a legal crisis. And we've seen that the international justice mechanisms have failed to punish and prevent war crimes in Palestine. But I think here where the role of international civil society comes. So if the UN and international justice mechanisms fail to prevent and punish war crimes and human rights violations, then it's the role of states and civil society organizations to step in and ensure that these crimes are punished and preventable. So I try to just gather all my strength and to be politically correct amidst so much loss and so much agony and anguish and physical and emotional exhaustion. But I'm speaking to you just a few days yesterday. I've received the news about the killing, a massacre of a whole family of my dear friend Al-Arouqi family, where Israel has killed more than 50 people. 2 days ago, also Israel's robots flattened the whole neighborhood of my elderly uncle, who served all his life as chief of UNRWA Jabalia refugee camp clinic. I'm also speaking to you just a few days after the killing of my cousin's husband, Musa. Yesterday we were talking to his child, and his child was saying that My dad has gone to heaven, and he's in a better place than this word. This is the word of an 11-year-old child. And we're here discussing the role of civil society organizations and global accountability and terminology and so on and so forth. But so I'm speaking as well here as a 30-year-old Palestinian woman, a third refugee, a third generation Palestinian refugee. Whose grandparents were displaced from their home village which is now occupied and which has been occupied since 1948. And I can affirm to all of you, and I can assure you to all of you, 76 years of occupation, decades of siege on the Gaza Strip, Palestinians have never gave up on their rights, and they will never give up on their rights, because we stand for what is right. We stand for liberation. We stand for justice. Our right to return, our right to self-determination are sacred. And if you really want to support our demands, our political demands, our just cause, I demand you, I urge you to escalate your actions, to adapt new strategies of advocacy, to not waste time just discussing terminology and whether we have to call it genocide or not. And please just act, just call things as they are. Just be correct, just stand on the right side of history. Just respond to the calls of Palestinians and its civil society. Just join our struggle, our journey to liberation and justice, no matter how long it takes. And I know more than anyone else, as a Palestinian woman from Gaza who was born in a politically active family, to a father who was imprisoned for over 13 years in Israeli jails for his political activism, and to a mother who has been a feminist organizer, that the path to liberation and justice is so long, and it can be morally and mentally and physically tiring and draining and exhausting. But it's more exhausting for the Palestinians. And it's more exhausting for the people who have been enduring all these, who have been denied of all their rights, generation after generation. So I urge all of you to find comfort in knowing that empires will eventually fall and justice will ultimately prevail. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Tamam. I'm just in the middle of trying to give our next panelist an access. Just a second. So we will next be hearing from Budour Hassan, who is about to enter. Afterwards, we will have time for questions, so keep them coming for the Q&A box. Budour is working for the Amnesty International, and given the ICC arrest warrants, they had some very urgent tasks to do there. But they should be joining in a minute. Maybe while we wait, I can take one question already in between if Francesca and Tamam are available. So we have multiple questions now on the consequences on the consequences of this ICC warrant. So what is coming next? What can be done to ensure that the decision is implemented? And what will this mean in concrete terms?
Member states, party to the Rome Statute, will have to arrest Netanyahu and Gallant as soon as they set foot in one of their countries. There is no immunity that applies. Of course, member states can continue to violate international law as they deem it fit, and they will continue to dismantle the international legal order. And we shouldn't think, especially us in the West, shouldn't feel indifferent to this, because this is the system that has made us protected from wars, and it has kept peace and stability for a long time. So we should be the one carrying the most beyond ideas and ideals. What I do expect will happen is a storm from the US. You know that the US have, I think it's called the Hague Invasion Act. that I mean, I'm sorry for smiling. It's a very serious matter, but just think of the absurdity of it. I do not know the act in detail, but as I remember, it's an act that allows the US to attack the Netherlands, The Hague, because in case the ICC takes steps against, I think it's Israel in particular, they consider a belligerent act. So imagine, I mean, how incredible the system is. So here's the challenge. Justice is there, and justice, the institution system, I know. And the Palestinians and Tamam, I mean, I hope you take this from a place of immense compassion and understanding of how much the Palestinians have been victimized throughout history, together with other indigenous people, together with other indigenous nations. We shall not forget that the struggle you're part of today is a struggle that resonates so loud with others who see, and I've seen that to Aboriginal people or Native Americans or indigenous communities in Canada. They really feel for what's happening in Gaza, because they see that, and to the Palestinians in general, they see that what's happening to you, it's what has been happening to them, and they feel so much part of the struggle. So I do see that there is something bigger than Gaza and Palestine itself. Of course, this is something that it's a small consolation to the Palestinians, because they've been sacrificed on the altar of political convenience in a really ferocious way. But here is the challenge for all of us. We need to stand for justice. We need to make sure that the system will not activate itself from the capitals of our countries in order to defy and defeat justice.
Thank you. Do you want to add something, Tamam?
Yes, I really hope that states we will see a real appliance of the international law and international mechanisms for once. But I think it's very important to highlight that that Israel is not only the problem of Israel is not only about certain individuals, certain criminals. I mean, it's the whole state that was established on stolen lands, on confiscated lands, on the graves of Palestinians. So it's the whole regime that has to be dismantled. But I really I want to see it as a light of hope, and a step closer to justice. And but yeah, we should not lose sight of the broader context that yes, even if Netanyahu and other criminals get arrested, we need to continue the fight until full justice, until full liberation of the Palestinian lands, until Palestinians get access to their rights, to their political rights, including the right to return. And we should not give up on that.
Thank you, Tamam. I think we still don't have Budour with us, so I will continue with a question. This is on behalf of Sumud, the Finnish Palestine network. Francesca already touched this topic briefly, but I think it's important to highlight and give a concrete example. And there were similar questions in the chat also regarding other countries. So in September, our organization Sumud has filed a complaint with the Finnish Chancellor of Justice regarding the legality of Finland's arms trade with Israel. And the complaint raised concerns that this trade may violate Finland's obligation under the UN Genocide Convention, especially given the ICG's finding that there's a real risk of a genocide in Gaza. So how would you interpret the responsibilities of third-party states like Finland in this context, and what are the legal and moral obligations that they have to prevent genocide? And Tamam, if you want to elaborate on this regarding how would the civil society address this complicity?
Yeah, look, it's very clear. Member states, soon after the provisional measure, should have immediately suspended, as I said, all the arms transfer. And then all the more as after the ICJ advisory opinion recognizing the legality of the occupation, there should have been a full review and transparency of it on the ties that each government, including the Finnish government, have with Israel. Diplomatic, political, economic, military, strategic, financial ties. So Finnish citizens should know what Finland trades, imports and exports to and from Israel. Economic partnership must be suspended. Finland should have also started, I don't know if Finland has oh my God, what's his name? Universal jurisdiction. But in that case, Finland could have started investigating crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide. What are the universities that have partnership with the academic world in Israel? This has to be suspended. Right now, based on a principle of precaution, is to be suspended because So accords that feed into the occupation, accords that are of military or surveillance scope must be rescinded, and accords where there might be the risk of undermining the Palestinians must be suspended because of the principle of precaution. I would like to encourage, I will see if I can find it and put it in the chat, but together with other special rapporteurs, I put together a list of recommendations on things that states do. And because it won't be states doing that, I encourage the civil society and the students who listen to us to look at these recommendations and take some of them. For example, it would be great if there could be a coalition of Finnish organizations asking the government to do that audit, to reveal all the relations that it has with Israel. Banks, pension funds, investments in settlements, in business operating in settlements, military industry, surveillance industry, and so on and so forth. So among those recommendations, there is also the fact that there are other components. I don't know if BDS is penalized. In certain countries, BDS is criminalized. This must end. This must end because persecuting those who stand against apartheid are committing apartheid themselves. And this is an incredible area. I mean, I hope I had students researching this, whether apartheid can be a transnational crime in the sense, because there are many actors, many states persecuting solidarity with the Palestinians. This is something that needs to be addressed. It cannot stand justice. This is why when you take the case to litigation, one argument could be participating in the crime of apartheid. And also there is anti-Palestinian racism, and Tamam was referencing implicitly to it, but there has been so much pressure against people of all nations and of all religious backgrounds, including Jewish people, but Palestinians, first and foremost, in the diaspora, reacting to the genocide, to the crimes that Israel has been committed. It's been so, I hear you. I understand how painful it has been to see your family members and your communities and your the fabric of life being devastated, decimated by this, and being attacked, blamed, smeared because of this. It should be addressed. And there is one word to expose it. It's anti-Palestinian racism. Also, the way anti-Semitism and the accusation of anti-Semitism has been weaponized is abominable. And it is to be pushed back, both because it translates into a form of anti-Palestinian racism and repression of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly in our own countries, in our own Western democracies, but also because it belittles real anti-Semitism. Real anti-Semitism remains unaddressed. There is a rise of right-wing parties and forces in Europe, and they are racist and they are anti-Semitic. They are Islamophobic and anti-Semitic. Why don't we deal with it instead of silencing solidarity with the Palestinians? So I hope that these ideas will help you. And I will look for the website, for the link to the document, the recommendations I was referring to.
Thank you so much for the insights. We are taking notes. Tamam, do you want to comment something before I give the floor to Budour, who has now joined us?
I would just just following up on the Palestinian anti-Palestinian racism. My brother was on a trial just 2 days ago in Germany, in Berlin, for tweets concerning tweets that read "Free Palestine" from the river to the sea, and which is of course absurd, and it's outrageous and disheartening to see that he has to go this and we have to go this as a family, while our people and our families and friends are being killed every day in Gaza. I was also recently in a meeting with the Belgian Prime Minister, just actually at the beginning of the of Israel's military invasion military assault against in northern Gaza, and I made it very clear to him that he has the responsibility and in the continuation of the ongoing crimes committed against my family in Gaza as a person who comes from Jabalia refugee camp, and he has the power to just make as a very clear statement, a very easy statement that but what is happening in northern Gaza is a war crime. But he ignored it. He didn't even listen to what I was saying. He didn't feel that it was worthy, probably, of consideration. It just a few thousand people who are just being ethnically cleansed, and voila. So yes, Gaza has definitely revealed the stark reality of the global politics. It has definitely revealed that the double standards, the selective solidarity, the hypocrisy of the West, including Finland. And this hypocrisy is unfortunately not new to Palestinians, but I think we have been enduring this dehumanization operation for decades, while amidst international complicity and silence and ongoing normalization of relations with the colonial state of Israel. And although they have all the facts and all the stats, the statistics, and all the numbers about Israel's violations of international law and human rights in Palestine, and yes, but I think despite all of this, Palestinians wanted to keep this hope. I think at some point maybe we thought that. Or we wanted to think that the international community would, and including the civil society organizations in Finland and elsewhere, will escalate actions once Israel has crossed farther legal and moral lines. But unfortunately, we have been watching all together this genocide unfolding in front of our eyes, on our TV, on our televisions, on our social media accounts, while just being helpless and hopeless and useless. But and I can tell you, I've done my research. I saw that the Finnish president, Finland, signed a major defense deal with Israel just recently in November, and I can tell you that this deal was signed just a few days after Israel killed my brother-like and cousin Youssef, my cousin Rana and her 2 children, the whole family of my cousin Khalil, including his wife and his 3 children. But the Finnish president decided to defended his decision to sign this major defense deal as values-based realism. I don't know. I don't see any values, and I don't know about what reality he's talking about. And I think here it comes the role of civil society in Finland, that they have to use this momentum to pressure and to end complicity, to pressure the governments and states, not only in Finland but elsewhere, that they have to pressure their governments and their companies to end all ties with Israel at all levels, whether diplomatic, military, cultural, academic, and the list goes on. And just quickly regarding the gender advocacy, gendered focus advocacy, I think it's very important to use all tools and all themes to advocate for the end of occupation in Palestine. But I mean, there's a genocide unfolding in front of our eyes now, and absolutely, I think a genocide doesn't care about a woman, a man, or a child, or an elderly. And we're talking the very mere agency of a human being has been diminished, has been assaulted and violated before our eyes. So when I think it's very good, we have to use also the gender lens to advocate for the Palestinian rights, but we also have to be very careful not to fall into the trap of dehumanization. We have seen that the international institutions, international civil society, using gender-focused advocacy to dehumanize our men and to normalize and legitimize their killing, torture, and demonize them. and portray them as always terrorists. Our men are our men is as my brother, is my siblings, my cousins, my father, my friends, my exes. And the international civil society organizations as well, when they focus on the gender and act aspect, they also have to be very careful not to fall into the Orientalist, essentialist discourse that confine Palestinian women and represent Palestinian women as weak, voiceless, in need of saving and in need of some enlightenment and awakening, just to fit the Western cultural norms and standards of civilization and liberation. And the civil society as well, just I will wrap up. So the civil society as well need to be very careful not to portray the Palestinian struggle as a humanitarian developmental cause. They need to make sure that Palestine is to ensure that the Palestine is represented as it is. It's a liberation cause. It's a struggle for liberation, for justice, and for rights. Thanks.
Thank you, Tamam. I would think we will go back to the gender question also in the next presentation and in the future comments. So now we will hear from our final speaker before we continue with the questions. So please welcome Budour Hassan, who will talk about the gendered dimensions of life under occupation and genocidal conditions in Gaza. Budour, you have 20 minutes. You are welcome to begin.
Hello. Sorry, just because I'm running out of battery, so I'll try to be as brief as possible. Sorry, just speaking via voice. I'd like to start from where Tamam ended, actually, because I think it's extremely, extremely important. What Tamam really touched upon very powerfully is the issue of the dehumanization of Palestinian men. And throughout the past, I think 13 months, a part of our documentation at Amnesty has been interviewing victims, survivors, people who lost loved ones, hundreds of people who lost loved ones, whose loved ones were killed by Israeli airstrikes. And those included so many bereaved fathers. On so many occasions, we were interviewing fathers literally as they were digging up the remains of their children with their own hands. We interviewed fathers whose husbands whose wives were killed, whose children were killed, whose entire families were wiped out. And we got to experience firsthand the full spectrum of humanity of Palestinians, the fragility, the brokenness, how shattered these fathers were, how turned upside down their worlds are. And when you read the statistics, the breakdown of fatalities, it tells you X percentage is women, X percentage is children, and the X percentage who are men are by default, unless proven otherwise, are treated as combatants, or as Tamam said, they're demonized as terrorists. What these statistics don't tell you is that these men were parents to children, were husbands to wives, were fiancés, were lovers, were workers, were sons, were so many things, and they're just completely drowned in this sea of statistics that doesn't even recognize their humanity. And I think this is why it's extremely important to accentuate what Tamam said is, yes, when we mention the gendered aspects of occupation and war, we tend to fall in a trap that essentializes men, especially Palestinian Arab brown men, and does not recognize the civilianness of these people and and their role as members of families, and also the extra pressure that living under occupation poses for them, especially when they are forced to shoulder so many responsibilities, be sole breadwinners, and even lose their tenderness because they live under a system that tells them that this has no room, that there is no room for their full humanity to show. So I think, and this in turn really has huge impact on women. I am obviously this presentation does not have space for that, but it's always extremely important because when we say gendered impact, we have to also recognize the gender impact of occupation, colonization, apartheid, also on Palestinian men. And to just explain, to try to give some glimpses of part of our documentation, especially on the impact of conditions of life and the impact of the destructive conditions of life that Israeli authorities have imposed on Palestinian women and girls. I'll start generally speaking, and it's not only confined to Gaza, but generally speaking, we have been seeing how apartheid as a whole has fragmented Palestinian families. And when we're saying Palestinian families, the fragmenting, invading the intimacy of the Palestinian family, it has particularly and disproportionately affected women in the sense that, for example, because we know Israeli apartheid has different tools that it operates on different Palestinians, and the Palestinians as regards to their the color of their passport, the color of their identity documentation. Of course, at the end of the day, it's all part and parcel of the one system of apartheid, but it applies differently across the geographic regions in Palestine. So, for example, in occupied East Jerusalem, we see the impact on Palestinian women, especially when it comes to family unification and when the choices, the very simple choices of where to live, who to fall in love with, where to go, where to study, where to form a family. All of this is dictated by virtue of what's the color of my ID, what's the color of my partner's ID, can we live together in Jerusalem? If I get married to this person, will I be expelled from Jerusalem? Where to have a house, so my center of life is recognized as Jerusalem, and I eventually don't lose my ID, how to make sure that I register my children properly, make sure that they have social insurance, all of that. Before even deciding to fall in love, a Palestinian woman will have to decide carefully on that, because otherwise she will have a long life of just struggling to actually cope with everything. And it's often falls on women to do that, because it's women usually who have to chase the lawyers, who have to go to the Ministry of Interior. And you just can imagine what for so many all over the world is just a routine, for Palestinian women is a matter of life and death. And I'm saying life or death because it can be the difference between being able to send your child to a hospital or not. So this is just one example of how this affects Palestinian families in general and affects Palestinian women in particular. When we're talking about home demolition, of course, home demolitions affect the entirety of the family as a whole. But when it comes to women in particular, the effect is that it forces them to re-establish the zone that they call the privacy, the zone which was once their home, to kind of try to reinvent life for their children, for their families, and to try in an attempt at circumventing all that brutality and just try to somehow grant their children and grant their family members a sort of dignified life. And it always falls on women to do that as they juggle so many other responsibilities. Of course, what we are seeing now on Israel's ongoing onslaught in Gaza has taken all these to a whole new dimensions. Of course, the struggle of Palestinian women to just keep their loved ones alive is not new. It's to just survive in Palestine under occupation and apartheid is an everyday struggle. But in Gaza, it has reached an unprecedented scale, especially amidst the inhumane displacement, the repeated displacement, and waves upon wave of displacement. as Israel shrinks more and more the pockets of land where Palestinians are allowed to stay, as the conditions with every displacement become incredibly more difficult. How has this been reflected on women? It's been reflected on so many different ways. First of all, the loss of privacy and home. So, which means that when a woman or a girl is staying at a tent and or is having to move, just because Israel thinks that with every so-called evacuation displacement order, they can shift the entirety of sometimes tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people from one place to another just by virtue of a Facebook post issued by Kogat ordering people to leave. And then people want to survive, so they have to flee. And they often flee leaving everything behind. They can't take anything with them except for the clothes that they are wearing. People who fled or were forced to leave, were displaced in October 2023, were wearing their summer clothes. Now we're talking about 1 year, 2 months later. They probably just did not take anything with them. And with the prices and with the restrictions on the entry of aid and essential services, it's been even the very necessary items, including wearing slippers. The dream of so many women in Gaza has been to wear proper slippers. So this is something that the lack of warm clothes and the lack of privacy, because living in the tent means that you absolutely have zero privacy. You can't lie down. I interviewed one woman who told me, look, my dream is to be able to lean on something, to lean on a wall. I need something solid to lean on. And I've been thinking about this. I need something solid to lean on. It's not just it's obviously a factual expression that she has nothing to be able to lean on, but it's also a metaphor for what Palestinians in Gaza have been forced to deal with. They have nothing to lean on, probably except for each other, and everyone is so devastated, collapsed, although they have been trying to survive. Palestinians in Gaza they have used every single way in order to survive and keep their families alive. And they've gone through the humiliation of displacement, and to actually leave everything behind entails so much humiliation, so much loss, so much uprootedness, because for so many of these people, the trauma of 1948, for some it's the first-hand trauma because they were displaced themselves in 1948. For others, it's the trauma of their parents or grandparents still lingering, the fear that if they are displaced, they will not be allowed to go back to their homes again. The stories that they heard from their grandparents or parents, or that they themselves have experienced, are still very much fresh in their minds. So to decide that despite all of this to leave is because people want to keep their families alive. And we're talking about more than 90% of the population of all of Gaza has been displaced at least once. The vast majority has been displaced on multiple occasions. And displacement is, I know sometimes even when you want to move home, it's a struggle. You worry about, even in ideal circumstances, you worry about packing, you worry about, okay, how long it will take you to adapt to your new home, even if it's the most beautiful new home in the world. So imagine when you have to do it in few minutes, because obviously Israel fails to provide sufficient warnings or sufficient orders. These displacement orders no way meet the conditions for these orders to be legal under international law. They amount to the crime of forcible transfer. But in addition to all of that, they have to do it sometimes within the space of 1 day. They are ordered to leave on 1 day. The next day, the place to which they were forced to leave has been declared a zone for displacement, which means that they have to flee again. On some occasions, they have to sleep literally next to dumps, literally next to sewage pipelines. As there is no room to set up a tent. So the issue, and for many girls and women, they say that we can't talk about privacy because it kind of feels like a luxury. Who would talk about privacy when people are being torn to shreds by bombs? When people barely have anything to feed their children, would I talk about privacy? But then privacy is a tenet of these people's dignity. We've talked to girls who had their first period in a tent. Like they didn't, which means just the thought of having cramping for the first time in a tent, not having proper menstrual products, not having any form of tenderness, not being able to share your feeling with your mother, not being able to actually talk to your friends, because obviously maybe most of your friends have been killed. So the impact that this experience will have on these girls, and these 12, 13-year-old girls, is something that we will only be able to realize many, many, many years later. And all of this, we should not forget, all of this is happening while Palestinian women and girls don't have proper access to any form of healthcare, be it physical healthcare or mental healthcare, because of the Israeli restrictions and because of the collapse, Israel's destruction of the Palestinian healthcare system. And then this would take me to the next issue, which is the struggle that Palestinian breastfeeding mothers and pregnant women have been facing in Gaza in particular, which mean not being able to receive any form of prenatal health services, having to subsist on really on a diet that's not fit for women who are due to give birth, not having vitamins, not having proteins, sometimes having to go through labor in the tent, and just giving birth in hospital and immediately having to be discharged and go back to unhygienic conditions. One doctor we interviewed told us how the women were asked to cradle their children on the floor because there were not enough incubators. There was no room in the incubators at the hospital at the time, because the incubators were full. They had to put few children in one incubator, few newborns in the same incubators, which left women with no other choice but to cradle to keep their children warm with their own hands on the floor. The inhumanity of these conditions for women, for girls, for every person, for every Palestinian living in Gaza is incalculable. And one can only wonder, with years to come, what kind of impact, again, this will have on generations upon generations of Palestinians, the destruction of the Palestinian life, the annihilation of the Palestinians in Gaza, which has been so systematic and so targeted. So I'm just sharing glimpses of life. Whenever we kind of try to share the testimonies that we have been hearing from women, from girls, from men, we just think that this is only scratches the surface of all the brutality that these people have been living under. It will take us a long time to just even realize the extent of the oppression that these people were facing, whether those who were detained, whether those who were denied their childhood, they were denied their girlness, they were denied to live their pre-war female lives, to go with friends, even to do the very basic and small things. And this is, again, takes us to the mental health effect on the mental harm, the irreparable and irreversible mental harm that this will have on generations of Palestinians, because this is very hard to gauge, this is very hard to actually calculate, and the effort that this will take from all of us to reconstruct, rebuild, not just Gaza as a place, but rebuild the humanity, the Palestinian character in Gaza. It's going to be a decades-long effort. And the longer this war continues, the longer there is no ceasefire, the longer these bombardments, the longer these displacement waves and orders are allowed to go on, the more difficult it will remain to actually even start to stitch together whatever has been left of Palestinians in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Budour, for sharing your research and the very illustrative examples. Then we will move back to the questions for all of the panelists. So the next question comes from Laura Henry from the Finnish Women, Peace and Security Network. So Laura, welcome.
Thank you, Ida, and first of all, thank you, Sumud, and also colleagues at the Finnish Women, Peace and Security Network for organizing this webinar, creating this space, and of course for all the speakers who've spoken before me for your very important insights and of course your personal reflections as well. This situation is affecting many of you on a very personal level, so thank you for that. My name is Laura Henry, and I work at the CMI Matti Ahtisaari Peace Foundation, which is a Finnish foundation specialized in dialogue and mediation. And I have the honor to present the question on behalf of the Finnish Women, Peace and Security Network. Kind of going back to the Women, Peace and Security agenda, one of the key pillars is protection. In our work and our discussions with Palestinians, especially women actors and organizations, what we are hearing that even those who have been strong supporters of the Women, Peace and Security agenda consider that this agenda has failed to protect Palestinian women from the violence of the occupation, and it has focused too much on violence perpetrated by Palestinian men against the Palestinian women, and not kind of putting this into the context of the occupation and how that influences, for example, domestic violence. I would be interested to understand if you have suggestions for the international community on what kind of concrete steps could international community take to support more the protection of Palestinian women from different forms of violence. Thank you.
Panelists who would like to go first?
I apologize. I'm so sorry. I had to full honesty, I had to step away from the computer, open the door, and I missed part of the question. If you can kindly, Ida, try to summarize, or Laura,
I'm happy to. So basically, I think the question was about protection of Palestinian women, and I think that a lot of the international actors are focusing very much on the violence by Palestinian men against Palestinian women, and maybe disregarding the occupation and how that's affecting the violence. So if you have any suggestions on very concrete steps that the international community could take to support protection of Palestinian women from different types of violence.
First of all, I want to check, because I have something to say, but I want to check if Tamam and Budour wants to go first, because again, this is something that regards also their society, and I prefer to defer that part of the question to them. But I have a lot to say when it comes to the international community. Shall I go?
Thanks a lot.
Go ahead, Tamam.
I think this discourse the discourse of the UN Women and many international community and many woke feminist organizations and the West focusing on the violence perpetrated by Palestinian men on Palestinian women is absolutely not only reductive, that doesn't take the whole context actually, and it's reductive, but also it's very racist, supremacist, and white, and very dehumanizing and demonizing of our men. And I mean, it just wants to show and portray Palestinian men as always, of course, the evil, the brown, barbaric, uncivilized men who are so obsessed about women and voila. So I think the international community need to understand that the protecting women starts with the ending the occupation, and it needs to understand that. The occupation also has the Israel's occupation of Palestine doesn't only impact the political aspect and sphere of Palestinian lives. It really touches on every aspect of Palestinian lives, whether it's intimate, whether it's personal, whether it's professional, whether it's economic, whether it's on the gender aspect or power dynamics in the society. So yeah, the international community has just to step in and take immediate actions to hold Israel accountable, to cut its support to Israel, and in order to and in that way we will ensure a protection of Palestinian women. There is no protection of Palestinian women without end of the occupation. Full stop.
I'm glad I'm glad you spoke before me. Budour, would you like to chime in or shall I go?
No, you can go. You can go ahead, Francesca.
By the way, always a pleasure to be reconnected, Budour.
Thank you.
And so I want to take right from where Tamam left. And again, bear in mind that before being a special rapporteur, clearly I'm a European citizen who comes from a country where feminicide has been one of the highest in recent years. And not because it has become more, the society has become more violent, maybe so. Maybe there are less protection, there is more exposure, there are more risks, but there is also more reporting. We have levels of violence against women in our quasi-democracies, which are, again, maybe it's not the case in Finland, but again, look at the statistics in Europe, in the United States. So I see, first and foremost, let's understand what are the broader issues, because the Palestinian people, with different religions, with different political, cultural, economic backgrounds, are a macrocosm representing, in a way, epitomizing so many other societies, and not just in the Levant. Including in our societies. I come from southern Italy, and I've always found, in general, that part of the Levant, that part of the Middle East, so close to my traditions. I feel much more at home in the bad and in the good sense among people from that part of the world in terms of recognizing patterns and also stereotypes than to Northern Europe. I'm sure that my upbringing has much with a kind of some anti-woman, anti-feminist form of subreptitious violence is more common to that of the Arab world than probably Finland. But does it make Finnish people or us European in a position to go to the Palestinians, especially with our rich pockets of donors' money, and prescribe solutions? I find it so insulting. And this has been my position, especially as I became a special rapporteur since the beginning. Because I said, I've been preaching with the civil society and also ranting with the civil society operating in Palestine, saying, Palestinians do not need white saviors, do not need you to go there and teach them how to do embroidery or how to make mozzarella. They need to have their freedom because they're extremely talented, extremely smart to do their own things, to care of their own business. And excuse me, even this is much broader than gender violence. It's also when it comes to de-radicalization, fighting extremism, Who are we Europeans to go in other countries and fight extremism and radicalization? Let's look at our own countries, what they are becoming. The pockets of racism are no longer pockets. I mean, these are big chunks of voters who bring right-wing parties to the parliament and then to governments. So there is one and one only thing that the international community has an obligation with to start is the realization of Palestinians' right to self-determination, which means the right to be free as a people and to determine themselves as a people. The Palestinians in the Middle East also have a strong tradition of what we would call feminism. Look at the role of women during the first Intifada, like in Algeria. Both Algeria and Palestine are perceived like sort of backward societies when it comes to women's rights. But hey, excuse me, there have been wars and occupation and repression. And again, this is not to justify violence, but as Tamam was saying, domestic violence is often a reflex of external circumstances. And this doesn't mean that cannot be addressed from within the household. But again, our obligation is first and foremost to make sure that Israel ends the genocide, the occupation, and the apartheid over the Palestinians. And this also, if you allow me, goes to the quite paternalistic approach that our policymakers, that European policymakers adopt toward Palestine. Everyone feels sort of content with the assistance to the Palestinian Authority to reform the Palestinian Authority, but to do what? What is the Palestinian Authority to do when there is not even the territory to rule over a given people? So the responsibility should not be to try to reform or direct political forces, political parties in any other country. What is to be ensured is the respect of basic international law. As I said, we start with the right of self-determination. And this is it.
Maybe, Francesca, just to also add one thing to what you said is, yes, the realization that as Palestinian women, we have to fight so many different battles. And each battle requires its own, let's say, laws of fighting that battle, because we understand and we recognize when the issue concerns, for example, fighting against domestic violence, fighting against discriminatory personal status laws, fighting against conservatism within the Palestinian society that limits Palestinian women participation, and different trends in the Palestine, because Palestinian society, like so many other different societies, it has evolved, it's changed. What Palestinian society was in the 1980s, it's very different in the 1990s. The entry of different political forces have reshaped and changed the Palestinian society, and there is no such thing as monolithic, because Palestinian, it depends on where. It's very diverse, including also the role of women, including also some more progressive, more conservative elements, and it has changed over the past few decades. And this is something that Palestinian women have realized and continue to fight against. Sometimes the way the intervention from outside happens, it actually hurts the Palestinian women's struggle rather than helps it, because it kind of gives fuel to the idea that feminism is something that is imported from outside, when it's actually the opposite. So even when there is a well-meaning, well-intentioned help from outside, it's kind of can be interpreted as something that hurts the Palestinians. And finally, it's very interesting, we've been seeing, especially after the 7th of October, how conditional the support is for feminist organizing from the outside. Because yes, so many different groups, feminist, LGBTI groups operating in Palestine and the broader Arab world had received funding prior to the 7th of October. Now, when these same groups insisted on Palestinian right to liberation and self-determination, or Palestinian rights in general, these groups have been defunded. So what does that say? Is that Europe only supports you, European institutions will only fund you, support you when you kind of adopt their agenda, adopt their narrative. But the moment you stray from that, they will act dictatorially, they will act tyrannically, and they will strip you of funding, which also again plays into demonizing feminist organizing, even in the eyes of the domestic, the local society, because they would be perceived as, yeah, only answering to the dictates of the donors. So using donor money in order to impose agendas on on Arab and Palestinian feminist organizing, and then kind of saying, no, once you are no longer polite enough to deserve our money, will not support you, is also a testament to the conditional support, that actually the disingenuous support, that it was never about actually supporting feminist organizing. It was always about supporting a certain version of that so-called feminist organizing. Once that no longer abides by these dictates, oops, suddenly the feminist Europe will just leave you behind, will defund you.
Can I say something else as well?
Yes.
There is also another element that has created some discomfort in me. I do understand, for example, how the Gaza war has impacted women. Everyone has been impacted equally and differently. Children have their own vulnerabilities, and women have their needs, and so people with disabilities, old and new. But there is a way men are invisibilized. So even when you read the statistics, and this is something that I do, I'm also part of this problem, because in this fast-moving world of communication, information, discourse, already planting certain landmarks it takes a phenomenal effort. But think of when we say 70% of the victims in Gaza have been women and children. Children, fine. They should never been involved in resistance. But does it mean that women cannot be in active resistance, armed resistance? And also, what does it mean for the other 30% that is left out? First of all, without any judgment on the resistance per se, does it mean the other 30%, which is made of male, shouldn't be counted as an innocent casualty of this war? Shall we assume always that men are fighters, or men? And again, without saying whether fighters are right or wrong. No, I'm just saying that there is something extremely dehumanizing in the way we differentiate. So while yes, I'm all in favor to highlight the specific vulnerabilities and harm that is done upon this to individuals, I don't want this to invisibilize and obscure a category which has already vituperated enough, which is Palestine in the Western discourse, which is Palestinian men.
Thank you so much. We will have to start wrapping up. So if everyone could have a little final remark, and maybe combined with, there has been a lot of questions in the chat on what can we do, what is the most effective action we could take now. So 1 minute per panelist, what is to be done?
I will go last.
Budour, would you like to start?
Maybe sorry, Tamam, not to put you on the spot, but I think out of all of us, I think I'd like to hear from Tamam, to be guided by Tamam.
Well, thanks a lot. Well, I think if every little action does really matter. All forms of action do really matter. But I think we have done so many protests. We have gone out in millions and masses out to the street, calling for a ceasefire, calling for the end of arms transfers to Israel. We have, I think, done a lot on that side. I think failure of such acts maybe highlight that, of course, there's a huge gap between the masses and the people in power, but I think maybe we have to think of other actions. And I think I would leave this to your imagination and to your brave spirits and souls. But I think also a very important way to support Palestinians is boycott, join the BDS movement. Another thing is that, of course, without minimizing the Palestinian struggle to a humanitarian cause, there is, of course, urgent needs now in Gaza, and people literally are being starved, dehydrated. So we need also to continue supporting people financially, just to continue surviving, and in case they are not killed by Israel's missiles. And yeah, you have also to isolate and to enter all to have these uncomfortable discussions with your families, with your friends, and yes, I know that it can cause some conflicts in families and networks, but I think it's time to do it. I think we should isolate. I mean, I don't want to cause problems in your circuits, but I think it's people who are complicit, who are supportive of occupation, of colonization, of oppression, should be isolated and should be punished for their stance. And what else? Yeah, and I will leave, I think, the rest to Francesca and Budour. Thanks.
Thank you, Tamam.
Thank you, Tamam. I'll be brief. Yesterday, in a different event, I had to reread Edward Said's book, Question of Palestine. And in his 1992 edition of that book, he writes about how irony has become a constitutive of Palestinian life, in the sense that as there is more and more recognition of Palestinian rights, more and more support for Palestinian rights, more organizing by Palestinians, when it comes to the alienation, the deprivation, the displacement, Israel's disposition of Palestinians, little appears to have changed, and little appears to have changed in terms of the political powers that support Israel. And I think this was written in 1992, right? We're now in 2024, and this is even more clear that probably in terms of battling to win the poetic justice war, we have won it. I think Palestinians, the justice of their cause has been overwhelmingly recognized. The number of people mobilizing in the streets, recognizing it's not the way things were in the 1960s and 1970s. But this is coming on the background of so much brutality and so much disposition. And the question is, when will this be reflected? When the power that we are seeing on the streets in support of Palestinians be reflected in the establishment? When those voices on the streets will be reflected on actual real life political changes being made by the governments that continue to support Israel. And I think this is also a call for those who mobilize and who go to protest, while obviously continuing to go to protest is incredibly important, and supporting and protesting for the rights of Palestinians is incredibly important. The question is how then to translate this organizing by students, by dock workers, by everyone else on the ground into sustainable political change. And maybe that will require some probably less attractive way of work, trying to talk more and more to the unconverted, trying to have uncomfortable discussions with people who probably will not listen to us today, tomorrow, but will be forced to listen later. So I guess it's also has to do with the question of how democratic European societies are, because when you see that the overwhelming majority of young people in particular are opposing what Israel does, but then their governments continue to support what Israel does, then their governments are not really adhering to the democratic value, to the voices of these people, then it's kind of also tells you that there is a problem, a gap of legitimacy and democracy within these societies. Okay, they allow you to protest, and even the right to protest is cracked down upon systematically, but it's also unlistened to. So I guess it's also a call to those in the global north in particular, organizing to reconsider how they can make sure that their protests are not just, they do not end by the moment they go back home, that they are something to build on in order to create systemic and long-term change.
Thank you. Francesca, do you want to briefly comment?
Yes. So I have a few issues to complement what my wonderful co-panelist said, and I have to say it's really an honor to be with you. Well, I know Budour, I didn't know Ida, and it's been a privilege to be with you, Tamam. I really appreciate that. Now, what to do? I have posted 3 things in the chat. So the recommendations I referred to. So please look at them. This is something that together with many other special rapporteurs, independent experts of the UN, and frankly, the most vocal part of the UN since the beginning of the genocide, we are really trying to change the system from within. But we need to be an army of goodwill people, and together we can make it. We cannot change the system one by one, but we need to understand this sense of togetherness. Togetherness is the epistemology, and it's at the heart of the epistemology of solidarity. Solidarity, for those who have not studied Latin, means solidum, which means being together. And solidarity, as someone dear to me says, is the political declination of love. So acting for Palestine is also, seriously, it's an act of humanity. But also, like I think Budour was saying, it's also a test for us, because we have seen in Europe, I don't know in Finland, but many of those connected, how do I know, are not from Finland. And many places in Europe, Italy, Germany, France, and the UK have turned so repressive, so crushing freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, even against the Jewish people. And this is something we need to understand. Defending Israel has nothing to do with fighting against anti-Semitism. And remember this talking point as it might come to fruition to you. My criticism is not against the Jewish people, is not even against the Israeli people, though I have some, but it's against the state of Israel. And they could be Buddhist, Christians, Muslims, atheists. My stance would not change. So they cannot use the anti-Semitism weapon against us. The second thing is speak Palestine, talk about Palestine, expose the reality. First of all, also educate yourself better. There is, again, I hope to have rendered justice to the question of Palestine through my work as a special rapporteur, talking about the self-determination first and foremost, to put an end to the debate about the two-state solution mantra. That report explains why self-determination is so critical. Mass incarceration, when you hear about the numbers of Palestinians in jail, know why they are incarcerated, because the system is meant to put them in jail so as to crush their right of self-determination, since they are children, in fact. But also the genocide reports. I do hope that you get familiar with those. It is genocide, and we need to understand what is genocide, in order to see that we cannot call anything else what Israel is doing is genocide. The other thing is that we need to build bridges and alliances. So, and it's about, sometimes we need to know to work as if I look at other resistance movement in South Africa or against the war in Vietnam, what has worked is to have this popular front. Popular front is not a wedding, is not a ceremony for life. It's sharing a path for the struggle. We don't need to be best friends. We just need to hold each other tight as we move forward, and we make sure that the system doesn't harm anyone. And this is why students need trade unionists. Trade unionists need civil servants. There are so many civil servants. not only those who have stepped down of the offices, but I want to spend a word for those who are still in the system and fight the system from within. And we have seen letters from civil servants from the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, the US. We need to understand that there are so many fighting. Also, the other thing is that as I always try to be inclusive in my approach and include the Israelis, this is not something that Palestine, but the Israelis get to be liberated themselves because they are part of a racist endeavor. They hold the privilege, which is dehumanizing, of course, toward the Palestinians first and foremost. But look at the monstrosity that has been activated in many of them, because there is something completely inhumane that must inhabit you if you can commit crimes as those that have been committed against Palestinians, elderly, women, men, and children in the past 14 months and before. The other thing is know your bias, know your biases, and recognize also the biases of the others. We need to fight together anti-Palestinian racism, which is massive, and it's different from Islamophobia. It's different from Arabophobia. Denying Palestinian identity. Whenever you hear people saying Palestinians do not exist, or there is not such a thing like the Palestinian people, or there has been no Nakba, this is like denying the Holocaust. This is like denying the existence of the Jewish people. So let's have this mentality alerted to be a bit more assertive instead of always defensive, and exposing discrimination, denouncing discriminations. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your comments. Unfortunately, we did not have time for all of the questions, but we plan to invite the panelists to Finland so we can continue the discussion then. On the question on what to do, on Sumud's behalf, I want to invite everyone to join our organization. My colleagues in moderation can spam the chat for that. We appreciate everyone joining us, and I hope this discussion inspires some action and engagement with the issues raised today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.